Was Derek Carr the missing piece to the New Orleans Saints keeping Michael Thomas all along? We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget we're free and available on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jacksonola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And on today's episode, it's Friday, so in case you missed it, we'll get you caught up on all the big news from around the week, including what went down with Derek Carr, why he chose New Orleans, what his contract looks like, the signing of Ugo Amadi, and so many other pieces. So we'll break all of that down, get you all caught up from a busy week in the New Orleans Saints facility. Then we'll take a look at something that has been a little bit of a trend that's changed for the New Orleans Saints. They've gone from missing out on a bunch of guys that they really like to landing a bunch of guys that they really like. And I think I have a reason for why that might be the case, even though logically that shouldn't be where they are right now, but they are. I'll tell you why. But first, it looks like Michael Thomas might be sticking around in New Orleans after all. And honestly, that would be a good thing for the New Orleans Saints as long as they do this correctly. And it seems that Derek Carr was just the missing piece all along. Derek Carr, not only starting quarterback, Derek Carr, not only top 5 in the NFL amongst active quarterbacks when it comes to comeback victories and game-winning drives and fourth quarter comebacks. I mean, no, not just that. He's also a Michael Thomas whisperer. It seems like the New Orleans Saints may be heading towards a deal with Michael Thomas to get him to stay in New Orleans. Now, we covered this as a possibility, which is a complete change of course from what we were expecting would be the case after the Saints reworked Michael Thomas's contract earlier on in the season. Now, the report most recently here comes from none other than, of course, Nick Underhill of New Orleans Football, that the Saints and Michael Thomas are working towards a deal. There's like conversations that are going on. I'm paraphrasing here, but nothing's imminent, but good progress is being made, is effectively what the tweet says. So why is that important? And what should we look at in terms of what a contract can look like? Well, the reason why it's important is that Michael Thomas is one of the most prolific pass catchers when healthy, when he's out on the field in today's NFL. He has been that guy. You saw a little bit of it early on in the season last year against the Atlanta Falcons and against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, how he can still be that dominant guy. But the issue is, can you keep him on the field? He's only played 10 games. 10 games in the last 3 seasons? That's ungreat, right? That's the opposite of great. It's not ideal, as my good friend Eric Crocker from over at Locked On 49ers would say. But when he's been out on the field, he's been marvelous. He's been exactly who you expect him to be. I mean, think back to that Arizona Cardinals. Don't think back to the Arizona Cardinals game. Don't do that. Don't. Think back to the Atlanta Falcons game last year. Yeah, how fun was that? Michael Thomas was just such a huge part of that big fourth quarter comeback. So that's one of the reasons why it's important. The other reason why it's important is that Derek Carr is a short intermediate type passer. Take what the defense gives you. Michael Thomas eats in those levels of the field. So now, how could the New Orleans Saints get this done? And what did I mean by it's good for them as long as they get it done right? Well, the fact of the matter here is that what they're working on is effectively an extension, but it's going to be a short-term extension, rework, get rid of some money that's non-guaranteed at the moment, create some new money, but then potentially add incentives. Because what the Saints should do here is go for a pretty moderately sized base salary. We'll use a working figure here in a second, and I'll walk you through how the Saints can get this done. And then playing time incentives in terms of availability incentives, but also performance incentives that are on the field, which would give him the opportunity to go out there, play at a high level with a guy that he likes in Derek Carr. Clearly, he was a part of courting Derek Carr, according to Derek Carr's brother, David Carr, in the sort of courtship to get him here to New Orleans. And he was also on social media just celebrating like crazy that Derek Carr was on his way to New Orleans to be their quarterback. And so what could a contract look like, right? If he has that level of appreciation for Derek Carr, that level of trust in Derek Carr to make him the wide receiver he knows he can be, how should the Saints build out this contract? Well, they have to protect themselves, right? They have to keep themselves at a distance so that they don't end up surrendering a bunch of money towards a player that might end up injured at some point or something like that. And that's already made quite a bit of money from them over the last 3 years. Now, Michael Thomas should not be concerned about the money that he's already made for New Orleans. That's New Orleans' problem. That's not his problem, right? He doesn't have to be worried about that. He doesn't have to cut anybody any grace. But what the Saints can do here is go in with effectively like a 1-year deal that's got some void years on it. And there's a structure already out there that the Saints could build off of. That last year, the Arizona Cardinals did the following with AJ Green. They did a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. Some of that was base salary, around 1.8. The rest of it was signing bonus that got stretched out into a void year for 2023. So they still have a little bit of that signing bonus sitting on the books here going into the season. But they loaded this contract up with incentives. The way that the Arizona Cardinals did it is that they set themselves up for 10 different incentives at $250,000 a piece. Those 10 different incentives, 50 catches, 60 catches, 70 catches, 80 catches, 600, 700, 800, 900 yards. That's 250 per, right? So at that point, we've gotten all the way up to an extra $2 million. Also did a 50% playing time bonus, 50% snaps as long as the team made the playoffs, 50% snaps as long as a team made the NFC Championship. So those two counted as an additional $250,000 each. So a total of about $2.5 million in incentives to go on top of the $3.5 million that were already on his contract. The Saints could do something similarly. Now, the tricky part is what should be the top of this contract? I'm working off of a structure right here from PFF, Brad Spielberger, who was on the show, that kind of used 1 year, $12.5 million as kind of the market price in estimation for Michael Thomas. So if we worked with that figure, here's the way that the Saints could get that done. And I'm doing this just to make the math a little bit easy, but you'd probably want to come a little bit lower on what the first year contract is, non-incentive based contract. But we're going to work with an easy round number here, 1 year, $10 million. Don't flip your lids. That might not be what it actually is. It might be what it is. Who knows? I'm just working with an even round, easy number to work with. So you go with a base salary of $1.65 million, which is what he reduced his salary down to. Remember, he was due 15.5 here. So we're building a top value of 12.5, but starting only at 10. So you do a base salary of the vet minimum. You take the rest of that, which is like $8.35 million, put that to him in a signing bonus, add 2 void years so that you're paying like $2.8 million over the course of the next 2 years. That puts his 2023 cap hit at like $4.1 million, just using the easy numbers there. Then you can go with 10 incentives of $250,000, $250,000 a piece. 50, 60, 70, 80 catches. I would go up on the yards from what AJ Green had, 700, 800, 900, 1,000 yards. You can go 25% of snaps played and 50% of offensive snaps played. And there you go. You've got 10 incentives, a total contract on the high scale of $12.5 million, which matches that PFF estimation. That's the number that I was working with. But that doesn't overcommit you and only cost you $4.1 million here in 2023. That is not a bad place for the New Orleans Saints to be if it means keeping Michael Thomas around, if they believe he can get back to form. And clearly, they think he can come back to not necessarily 2000 and, record-breaking 2018 season, but instead getting back to a situation to where he's producing and he's their number one split end wide receiver, the main go-to guy. They can do that, protect themselves, still potentially get the upside, but if at any point he's unavailable, then bam, you don't have anything to worry about. There's also additional things they can put in there. They can remove the guarantees if there's a certain thing. There's an injury clause they can put in. There's so much of this that they can end up putting in to save themselves and protect themselves should they deal with any further injuries with Michael Thomas, but keeping him around and pairing him up with Derek Carr. And this would not keep them from also further investing in wide receiver as well in the draft or via free agency because they're not spending a ton of money to get this done. This is a great move for the New Orleans Saints as long as they structure it and get it right. And with Khai Harley at the helm, this is about to be a whole masterclass in how to build out an NFL contract for an injured player. And very likely this is, or a more commonly injured player, and very likely this contract will become a blueprint that you will see over and over and over again in the NFL moving forward. Coming up next, there's been a change in a key trend for the New Orleans Saints. Let's discuss what that trend is and why it might be the case as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. And right now, Mint Brownie is my favorite Built Bar right now. They have a Mint Brownie Puff Built Bar for a limited time. You can only find it over at Built.com. That is a marshmallow protein bar. Yeah, they found a way to make marshmallows healthy, y'all. It's freaking incredible. Covered in 100% chocolate, mint chocolate with a little bit of that marshmallow creaminess. Oh, this thing has got to be to die for. I have some on the way right now. Make sure you go and get yours at Built.com as well. But Built.com is not the only place you can get them. You can also find them at Walmart as well as Sam's Club as well. So if you got a Walmart near you, all you have to do is head over to the pharmacy section. You're going to find 4 boxes of incredible flavors like cookies and cream, double chocolate, which is new and improved, by the way, and coconut puffs. If you head over to the Sam's Club, you're going to be able to find a 13-bar box. Get that baker's dozen of some hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. Go and check them out. The best tasting protein bar on the market. You can find them at Built.com, Walmart, and Sam's Club. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Thank you so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. The New Orleans Saints have had a huge trend change over the course of the last off season. And that trend change is that there was a streak of time between 2016 and 2022, at least that's as far back as memory serves for me. 2014, 2015 were such rough years anyway, that the Saints would get far down the road on a contract with a free agent or courting somebody or targeting somebody in the draft, only to have that free agent pivot at the last second to a new team that wasn't even a part of the original conversation, or get leapt in the draft for that player, things like that. And when I say that this goes back to 2016 for me, and I'm sure that there are probably people out there, some of y'all might be able to remember players from the 80s and 90s that this have happened with as well. And so it's not necessarily a new trend, but just looking at kind of this new era of the New Orleans Saints, the post Super Bowl era, there's a lot of times where we discuss the New Orleans Saints as a free agent destination. However, a lot of times that didn't end up always panning out. Let's go back to 2016, Josh Norman. They get all the way down the road on Josh Norman, and then all of a sudden he goes and he signs with Washington, of all places. And that's where his career started to taper off. So maybe the Saints missed out on something there, but didn't miss out on something there. You know what I mean? The very next offseason, when it comes to the NFL draft, 2017, all those rumors, the Saints really wanted Patrick Mahomes, but the Chiefs left them at 11, picked him at 10. And then bam, the Saints still got Marshawn Lattimore, walked away with Ryan Ramczyk in that same draft as well. One of their best draft classes, 2017, 2006, 2022's got some really promising pieces to it. But that Patrick Mahomes one was something that kind of continues to wait. People still talk about, oh, well, if the Saints wouldn't have gotten left for Patrick Mahomes, imagine where they'd be now. Let's go to 2018. Free agent pursuit, Commander's Palace. You've got Sean Payton on one side of the table, and you've got Big Ndamukong Suh on the other side of the table, right? Having a nice dinner at a key, sort of marquee New Orleans restaurant, traditional, all that. And what does Ndamukong Suh do? Well, he goes and he signs with the Los Angeles Rams, mercenary for hire, right? Then they go on to contend, right? That season, 2018, they get Saints. You know how that all ended. We don't got to go through all that. Let's go to the next year, 2019, the year right after that. The New Orleans Saints wanted to add an edge rusher to their repertoire. If I remember correctly, there are actually 2 in this. I'm going to stick with what I know for sure. I'll tell you the other one that I feel like I'm remembering as well. But Jadeveon Clowney, right? They get all the way down the road on Jadeveon Clowney back in 2019, only for him to then pivot. He was down to the Saints and another team, and then all of a sudden he's like, nah, I'm going to Tennessee. And again, much like Josh Norman, the rest of Jadeveon Clowney's playing time hasn't been fantastic. So maybe the Saints dodged something there. But if I remember correctly, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Robert Quinn was in that offseason as well before he went to Dallas, I think it was, that he ended up in 2019. Yeah, Dallas. And if I remember correctly, the Saints were in on him too. That didn't work out. They were going after Jadeveon Clowney. Jadeveon Clowney brings him all the way down the road and then signs in Tennessee. 2021, so we skip a year here. 2021, Terrace Marshall, right? There's all those rumors that the Saints really wanted Terrace Marshall. Carolina left them and grabbed him. They really wanted Carolina in that second round, pick 50, whatever it was. They were really looking at Brady Christensen. Heard that the Saints really wanted Terrace Marshall. They drafted Terrace Marshall instead. After they heard that, still got Brady Christensen in the third round, left the Saints without being able to add a receiver there in 2021. At least early, right? I believe they still left with Quan Baker later on that year. That same offseason, or not necessarily offseason, but there was like some conversation, right? In terms of like the potential of the Saints being interested in Odell Beckham Jr. early on that offseason. Then the trade deadline comes. Odell Beckham Jr. is going to be on his way. He ends up getting cut, ends up wanting to go somewhere else, gets courted, all that stuff. Calls the New Orleans Saints, right time, wrong place, goes to the Los Angeles Rams, almost wins the Super Bowl there. And then, of course, last offseason, the Deshaun Watson situation, Arizona Cardinals were in the mix, New Orleans Saints were in the mix. And then all of a sudden, the fully guaranteed contract with the Cleveland Browns, and he ends up going that way. But since then, the Saints went into the 2022 draft considering Chris Olave a can't-miss prospect, right? Brian Hartline, who, the Saints are close with and know, right? Obviously, DA knows Brian Hartline well. Obviously, Jeff Ireland knows Brian Hartline well, the Miami connections. And so they go into the draft. Chris Olave is a big-time target for them to an extent. I think Trevor Penning was a big-time target for them as well. They leave, though, with Chris Olave. They don't get jumped. They trade up. They make the move that they need. They get Chris Olave in the building, and now he was the Saints' top receiver in 2022. During the offseason, some flirtation, right? Early flirtation between them and Tyrann Matheiu. He comes and he visits the stadium, or not the stadium, the facilities, hanging around in New Orleans, is going to LSU, speaking, all this other stuff. It's like, oh, we're just checking in, getting to know each other. No big deal, right? Remember that? Then the draft happens. The Saints don't draft a safety. Everybody's like, oh, no, the Saints didn't draft a safety. And everybody in Louisiana, everybody in New Orleans is going, What happens? They sign Tyrann Matheiu. Not only Tyrann Matheiu, remember, there was also the flirtation between the New Orleans Saints and Jarvis Landry. And what did Jarvis Landry do? He signs in New Orleans. Oh, I don't want to forget Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He was another one, right? The Saints got down the road on, and then he ends up going to Kansas City. But the Saints get Chris Olave in the draft. They get Trevor Penning in the draft. They get Jarvis Landry in the draft, not in the draft, in free agency. They get Tyrann Matheiu very late in free agency. And in this offseason, they come into the offseason knowing, targeting, Derek Carr is our guy. And what do? They sign Derek Carr. So I guess the question really is like, what's leading to that? What's making the New Orleans Saints that destination to where the Saints are able to come in and designate, say, we want this person, and then they sign that person. And they've done that with some key players on their roster. I know Jarvis Landry didn't work out, injuries, things like that. I don't hold that against the Saints, right? Jarvis Landry, there's no way to look at Jarvis Landry and say that wasn't a good investment, right? It wasn't a good, and you can't look at that and say that wasn't a good option. You can say it didn't work out, but that's really about it. But the Saints, I think the thing that's changing is, A, the competition that's around them, right? The NFC is getting weaker. The NFC South is getting weaker, all of that. But you can see how strong this locker room is. And you can see the culture that still prevails out on Airline Highway, out in Metairie at the team facility. And so for all of the conversation that was happening last year about Dennis Allen losing the locker room and that the players don't trust Dennis Allen, they don't believe in him, all these other things, none of that's true. Like, I'm sorry, but like none of that is true because we were there. Right? We're in the locker room, right? And so I think this is proof positive of that like there's still something that players feel like there's worth playing for here in New Orleans, even though Sean Payton's not here anymore, which used to be the big selling point that everybody, held up. But maybe there's something about the organization. Maybe there's something about the leadership. Maybe there's something about the culture, the players, the locker room, whatever it is. Maybe there's something about that. Will it last? You got to win games. Can't have another 7-10 season and expect that to last. You got to have a 10-7 season. Got to make got to make the playoffs, win a division, all those things in order to keep all that alive. But I'm just saying, they're not in a situation to where a 7-10 season made them unsalvageable or anything like that. Saints are still in a really good place here. And I think their ability to attract the free agents that they're looking for, not have leaks go out, not, have situations happen to where they're getting leapt in the draft. These are all good things that you should be very excited about as a Saints fan. All right, coming up next, it's Friday. We're going to get you caught up with all the big stories from around your New Orleans Saints. And of course, we're going to go through a lot of stuff with Derek Carr here, the timeline, why he came, what the contract looks like, why you shouldn't be worried about it. We'll take a look at Ugo Amadi, what he brings, the Saints safety that they just signed, and why nobody's in on Lamar Jackson. We got all that coming up for you as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrap it up today's episode of Locked On Saints with our Friday tradition, especially here in the offseason. In case you missed it, getting you caught up on everything. So in case you missed it, Derek Carr is New Orleans Saints starting quarterback. New Orleans Saints got it done. Here's the timeline on all of it. Saints ended early January, right? Didn't make the playoffs, 7-10 season, all that. They immediately, or not necessarily immediately, but took a couple of weeks, but then they began to begin their evaluations of the roster, staff, all of that, just a couple weeks later. By the time they had arrived in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, end of January, beginning of February, you already kind of knew where they were going to go, and it already seemed that quarterback was going to be a spot that was going to get shaken up on the roster. When they had made the decision to retain Pete Carmichael at offensive coordinator, which happened before then, they effectively told everybody that the issue they believed was with personnel, bad execution, things like that, but still had some things they needed to improve on the coaching staff. So you saw a lot of coaching changes. You remember it was in Mobile where I dove on the couch and I told you my conspiracy theory is that Derek Carr is going to be the next quarterback of the New Orleans Saints. Let me tell you why. Well, by the time the Senior Bowl ended and we're getting closer and closer to the Super Bowl, February 8th and 9th, that's when Derek Carr decides, I'm going to go ahead and visit New Orleans. This was when he could still potentially be traded. Derek Carr came here, met with New Orleans Saints brass, took him to Ralph's on the Park over in City Park, took him over to the facility, toured his wife Heather around the city so they could see some of the beautiful areas that they can live. But February 12th, Derek Carr tells the Raiders and pretty much anybody that's listening in the world that he won't accept a trade to the New Orleans Saints or anyone, right? And it always seemed like that was going to be unlikely, right? And I think the Saints knew that too. So then after that happens, Derek Carr visits the Jets soon after that, but then the Combine rolls around. He visits again with the Jets, again with the Saints, meets with the Carolina Panthers. My understanding is that also a couple of other teams had made their pitches to Derek Carr, and he politely told them, no, thank you. Not sure if it was how many it was. I've only heard a couple, so it could be 2 or 3, right? But then it was the 5th of March, the end of the Combine, that ESPN's Jeremy Fowler puts out a report that comes out, says that Derek Carr has a slight lean to the New York Jets. Less than 12 hours later, March 6th in the morning, Derek Carr signs with the New Orleans Saints. Reportedly, after mulling the decision over with Todd Downing, who had been a staff member that Derek Carr was very close with in Oakland with the Raiders, and then eventually ended up in New York and was kind of the guy that I was saying, like, hey, that's the guy that can pull Derek Carr to New York if they're all in on him. But big thing that ended up being a big issue was that did the New York Jets really want Derek Carr? So that gets us to our next, in case you missed it. Why did Derek Carr choose New Orleans? Well, a couple of different things. Obviously, there's relationship with Dennis Allen, drafted him in 2014, chose him as a rookie to start immediately after that. The courting efforts as well of Tyrann Matheiu and Michael Thomas, further backing our earlier topic of the show. Could Derek Carr be a key in keeping Michael Thomas? Well, Michael Thomas apparently played a key role, according to David Carr, Derek Carr's brother, in getting Derek Carr to New Orleans, basically saying, nah, you coming to New Orleans, man. Come hang out. So now vice versa, Derek Carr might play a key role in keeping Michael Thomas in New Orleans. Additional relationships on the roster obviously mattered. Demario Davis during Super Bowl Radio Row, speaking towards his personal relationship with Derek Carr. Cam Jordan courting publicly around Derek Carr as well. You saw all the Saints also celebrating on social media when he was signed. Another reason why the Saints were so appealing to Derek Carr was the defense, right? Derek Carr's best defense in his career with the Raiders was ranked 20th overall and allowed 373 points in a season. The Saints haven't allowed more than 353 points since 2016. 6 years strong and running. 353 points were allowed by the Saints in 2018. But 2016 is the last time that they allowed more than that. The other piece is what I alluded to earlier. The Jets didn't seem to really want Derek Carr first and foremost. They wanted Aaron Rodgers. And now you've seen that kind of go down the road. They're meeting. Basically everything's in Aaron Rodgers' hands now. But the New Orleans Saints were the team that wanted him. David Carr on the podcast appearance that I mentioned earlier, I believe it's the Harvest of Sports podcast, is his son that hosts that, said that he came from a situation where a team didn't want him. So what of course did he want more than anything else? Well, to be wanted. And the New Orleans Saints identified Derek Carr as the guy they wanted. They immediately went after him. And of course, good quarterback conditions. Weather is great in a dome. In case you missed it, Derek Carr's contract is a 4-year, $150 million contract, $37.5 million per year. But don't worry, that's not the real number. The real number is what's in the guarantees. Only $100 million of the contract is guaranteed. That's going to be pretty much paid out with the exception of some of the prorated bonuses by the third year of the contract. So really what you're looking at here is a 33.3 repeating, right, $3 million contract per year in terms of the guarantee structure. That's the important number to know. This contract at $37.5 million per year puts him at 10th in the NFL after Daniel Jones signed his contract. We'll wait for Lamar Jackson to get his $50+ million per year contract or whatever it's going to be. That'll knock David Carr down to the 11th highest paid quarterback. Then Joe Burrow would get his contract. That's 12. And then Justin Herbert will eventually get his contract. Derek Carr falls to 13. Jalen Hurts eventually gets his contract. Derek Carr falls to 14. See what I'm getting at here? Already a lot of cash to restructure in all of this as well, but Derek Carr's first year cap hit, just $7.2 million. Easy on the books. Between 2024, 2025, there's a lot of base salary stuff they could restructure, $30+ million or $30 million in base salary. They're going to restructure a bunch of that. There's also a $10 million roster bonus in 2025, where as long as that ends up ends up guaranteeing, which will be at the end of this year, they'll probably restructure that and move on with that as well. Last couple of pieces here. In case you missed it, the New Orleans Saints side, 5'9", 205-pound safety Ugo Amadi, a little bit smaller in terms of what the New Orleans Saints defensive back preference usually is, but this guy's not a usual defensive back. He's a big hitter despite the fact that he is just 5'9". He's one of those box safeties and special teams guys, played a lot in the snap. 2021, he took 220 special team snaps, 543 snaps at slot corner, over 300 of those in coverage, 101.4 passer rating when targeted in the slot, 1 touchdown, surrendered 1 interception. Back in 2020, a little bit better performance there, 92.8 passer rating when targeted, no interceptions though, no touchdowns allowed as well. High completion percentage when targeted, so he'll give them up, but makes some good tackles at the catch point. Will likely compete with Smoke Monday as a special teamer, maybe a slot safety, backup slot safety in this year's training camp. Very excited to see Smoke Monday. No real updates on him because the Saints don't have to give updates on injuries or injured reserve players over the offseason, but still very excited to see him. And then Bradley Roby, of course, is still on the roster as well, so he could start at the slot again, but it's going to be interesting to watch, like Ugo Amadi, Smoke Monday, Bradley Roby, and then the outlier of do Alontae Taylor and or Paulson Adebo cross-train in the slot and maybe get a start there. So you have your big three at the corner position, on the outside being Marshawn Lattimore, either Paulson Adebo or Alontae Taylor, and the slot corner being that's not starting opposite Marshawn Lattimore. But nice little signing for the Saints to get started here. Just a easy depth piece that's going to come in, but still be able to make some noise throughout camp. Finally, Lamar Jackson could be on the move, but it doesn't seem that his next home is going to be in the NFC South. The Baltimore Ravens put a non-exclusive franchise tag on almost said Derek Carr, Lamar Jackson. But keep in mind that in 30 years of free agency, only one player has ever changed teams on the non-exclusive franchise tag. It would be unprecedented to see this happen. Falcons, as well as the Panthers, have already said, we're not in on this, as well as a bunch of other NFL teams. Why is that happening? Well, something I have to correct from what I said in yesterday's episode. Deshaun Watson got a fully guaranteed contract last year. Kirk Cousins has been signing fully guaranteed contracts for a while. YouTube user pointed that out to me. Thank you for the clarification on that. But that is very true. 3 years, a couple years ago, 3-year deal that was fully guaranteed. Last year, 1-year deal that was fully guaranteed. So you've got 2 players out there who have gotten 2 quarterbacks who have gotten multi-year, fully guaranteed contracts. Does a team really want to be the one to turn those from outliers into precedent by giving a third fully guaranteed contract? And also, you don't want to risk doing all that negotiating just for the Baltimore Ravens to see your offer sheet, wait 5 days, handcuff you in free agency, and then just accept that offer anyway because you set the market, you proved what the market was, and the Ravens just wanted to have the market proved to Lamar Jackson, who doesn't have an agent who can't go out and figure out the market on his behalf. So that's where we are. You're all caught up with the week. Coming up this weekend, there will be a bonus episode. We'll get you all caught up on some good stuff this weekend. But also coming up on Monday, we've got Mock Draft Monday. So we'll do a full 7-round mock draft to get you ready. Who are the pieces that the Saints could add to help to bolster the offense around Derek Carr, but also strengthen their defense? We'll get all that done for you on Monday. Appreciate you as always making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day, every day for your second listen. make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL. Damian Parson, Keith Sanchez, bringing you everything you need to know from the biggest names in this year's NFL draft, as well as, of course, the sleepers and hidden gems that can make your favorite franchise, the New Orleans Saints, Super Bowl champions. Appreciate you. Oh, sorry, you could find that wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. Proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Appreciate you, as always, for making me a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi, especially at the parades. Love seeing folks at the parades with the St. Patty's Day parades coming up. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.